Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. As you know, Jim Garrity is away. Here in his place today is Scot Bertram. He's the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 on the campus of Hillsdale College, where he's also the director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, and he hosts numerous podcasts, including the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, and Wasn't That Special, 50 years of Saturday Night Live. Scott, happy start to the summer. Thanks for being with us today.
Unfortunate start to the summer, Greg. It's been very temperate up here in Michigan, which makes me very happy. And all of a sudden, it's 98 and humid this week. So I'm not happy about that, but I'm still here for you.
Thank you, sir. Well, yeah, there are some days like that in Michigan, and they're not pleasant, but hopefully they're few and far between this summer because the summers up there are amazing. But today was supposed to be the controversial decision day at the Supreme Court. I think for the most part that day has been shifted to tomorrow, but we did get one significant decision there as it relates to Planned Parenthood funding at the state level. This is the USA Today version of the story, but as I mentioned to Scott in our organizing email today, you could be forgiven if you thought that this was written by Planned Parenthood. But here's how it goes. An ideologically divided Supreme Court on June 26th sided with South Carolina in its effort to deprive Planned Parenthood of public funding, a decision that is likely to prompt other GOP-led states to take similar action against a healthcare organization under attack for providing abortion services. The court's 6-3 ruling, over the dissent of the three liberals, of course, that Medicaid patients can't sue over their right to choose their doctor could also limit care options beyond the controversial realm of reproductive care. Writing for the majority, Justice Neil Gorsuch said Medicaid law doesn't clearly bestow the right to sue. Instead, he said the federal government can withhold funding from a state that is not following the rules. And Planned Parenthood can challenge its rejection from South Carolina's Medicaid program through the state's administrative process. In her dissent, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said the majority's decision will likely result in tangible harm to real people. So, putting this into real parlance, Scott, it just means that these states do have the right to decide whether their funds go to Planned Parenthood. The Medicaid rules already say that taxpayer funds can't go to abortion. So the left is really howling up a storm for very little here, it seems, but clear guidance in a pro-life direction here, which is good.
It is good, and it's interesting to see Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson cite the very well-known result in tangible harm to people provision of Supreme Court rulings, where, that's always Constitution this, Constitution that, sure, but what about tangible harm to real people? Perhaps that's something that should not be considered. Justice Scalia always said he wanted that stamp that said stupid but constitutional. Like, we need something for Justice Brown Jackson that says could result in harm to actual people but constitutional, and see if we can maneuver her rulings around them that way. This is of course good news. I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one here on a podcast, but in my reading, the woman who brought this case forward essentially was saying, yes, there were other places I could go to spend my Medicaid dollars, but I like going to this Planned Parenthood clinic. And boy, Greg, wouldn't you and I don't know how many tens of millions of Americans out there on private insurance plans like that option too? Yeah, I really like that doctor. I know he's not in my network, but I like that doctor, and I think I should be able to sue to be able to see him. Yes, I know it's private versus public dollars, of course. And so this paves the way for other red states to do similar things to what South Carolina has done, in addition to what happened in the big, beautiful bill. And all these years of conservatives saying it's time to defund NPR and PBS, that it's time to defund Planned Parenthood. Rubber might actually be hitting the road here with this decision and other maneuvers. I am also interested in your comment on the coverage, Greg, because if you didn't know, today, in fact, is the 10-year anniversary of the gay marriage ruling at the U.S. Supreme Court. And if you look at, I was looking at the Chicago Tribune this morning. I'm sure it's similar in the Times and the Post and elsewhere. You'll see these articles celebrating 10 years since the ruling and how it's affected all these people's lives and how great it's been this past decade since the gay marriage ruling. And I very much look forward to, I guess it would be 7 years from now, 10 years of Dobbs. and USA Today and the New York Times saying what a great 10 years this has been in finding children who are alive because of the Dobbs decision and saying, isn't it better that you're alive than, say, killed in the womb? Don't you like that? Isn't Dobbs fantastic? Because this is how we treat monumental Supreme Court cases, right?
No, absolutely right. Well, we just had the Dobbs anniversary, the 3-year anniversary a couple of days ago, and there were plenty of press releases from Democrats and op-eds, editorials, and that sort of thing, of course, denouncing it. So the Supreme Court is only legitimate when it does what the left wants, and we'll talk about that a little bit in our second martini. One of the arguments in this particular case involving South Carolina was that because Medicaid doesn't allow taxpayer dollars to go to abortions. Instead, it goes to things like contraception and other quote-unquote services that Planned Parenthood does. And the counter-argument, of course, is that, well, yeah, so they get all this money for this. It frees up other money to do the abortions. And are you really sure that they're not shuttling this money over here to do that? So as Alexander DeSanctis used to say at National Review, money is fungible, and nobody does that better than Planned Parenthood, which then turns their taxpayer dollars into donations to the Democratic Party and rinse and repeat.
Yeah, it's money is fungible, and that was part of the South Carolina case here. Again, Planned Parenthood saying, yeah, we get this money, but we buy pens with it and staples and things like that. If the money comes in and you ostensibly aren't spending it on abortions and you're spending it on office supplies or contraceptives or whatever else the case might be, money's fungible. Other money that comes in then can be slid over to the abortion providing portion of Planned Parenthood. So yes, of course.
And I believe they set a record last year for abortions. So it's been a difficult stretch here in the 3 years since Dobbs. A lot of the blue states have been very, very aggressive, and Planned Parenthood has certainly benefited from that. But cutting off taxpayer funding from D.C. and beyond is definitely a step in the right direction. Tell you what's another step in the right direction, getting real about aging and hopefully slowing it down. Have you started noticing signs like poor sleep or low energy or stiff joints? Maybe even some more serious health problems than that. Well, aging is personal, and we all feel it in different ways. So if staying young and healthy matters to you, think about the time, money, and effort you've spent chasing that goal. But now imagine a product that could actually help you live longer, feel better, and slow down the aging process. It's called C15 from Fatty 15, the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in more than 90 years. It's an incredible scientific breakthrough to support our long-term health and wellness, and you guessed it, aging and longevity. Now, 72% of users report improvements in sleep, mood, energy, joint comfort, heart, liver, and metabolic health within just 16 weeks. No fillers, no flavors, no preservatives, no allergens, and has 3 times more cellular benefits than fish oil. Fatty 15 is on a mission to optimize your C15 levels to help you live healthier and longer. You can get an additional 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit by going to fatty15.com/3ml and using the code 3ml at checkout. That's fatty15, fatty15.com/3ml, code 3ml. All right, Scott, let's move to, I got to classify this as crazy at the moment, but it's bad that the Democratic Party is shifting more in this direction. It's not just the fringe anymore. Who wants to radically change the system that the founders wisely put into place? This is the proposal of Sean Casten of Illinois. He represents the 6th District. Once upon a time, less than 20 years ago, this district was represented by Henry Hyde. There's been a big change in the last 2 decades. I'm sure it's been gerrymandered to some extent too, but Illinois has obviously shifted left. But here's his statement. The problem. In theory, the fundamental promise of our democracy rests upon the trust that the government fulfills the will of the people, highlighted will of the people. In practice, there is a growing list of issues like campaign finance reform, gun violence prevention, access to health care, and voting rights, where the federal government has consistently failed to deliver the people's will. The judicial system, the Electoral College, and the United States Senate and the House of Representatives are each in their own way institutions dedicated to upholding the power of the minority of Americans. Here's his solution to this supposed problem. Representative Casten's legislation, which consists of 2 bills and a constitutional amendment, would establish 12 at-large senators to be elected through a national popular vote. This would also create, conveniently for them, 12 national votes in the Electoral College. Add approximately 250 additional members of the House, if it had been implemented after the 2020 census, and wants to rebalance the power of the Supreme Court. Yes, 13 judges, but even more radical than what Democrats were pushing not that long ago, 13-judge multi-circuit panel to hear cases where the U.S. or a federal agency is a party. So I guess we're not even going to have a Supreme Court anymore, or maybe you just get assigned from various circuits and so forth. So, I mean, Kasten's to the left, clearly. This is something you'd expect to see from AOC or somebody like that. But now this is kind of mainstream Democrat. I've never seen the 12 at-large senators before, or this particular approach to overhauling the Supreme Court. So what do you make of Kasten doing this, and is this now the mainstream on the left?
Well, you got to understand a little bit about Kasten first, I guess. And you're right. This is DuPage County, once one of the reddest places in the country, and now just deep blue. And that's a transformation that's happened certainly in the past 20 years, as you mentioned, from Henry Hyde, but really in less than 10 years or so. Peter Roskam had this seat up until 2018 when Kasten beat Roskam. A number of those tight districts flipped in Illinois in 2018. Redistricting happened, and he was put into a congressional district with Maureen Newman, who was very far left, and ended up beating her in the Democratic primary, but only he had to run left, but only had to not be quite as far left as she was, which was not all that hard to accomplish. And now pretty much has taken on that coat as a congressman. He's a 99%, voting with Biden guy, very big climate change guy. And so, he's not on the fringe left, but he's certainly on the left of the party. And this proposal, I'd never heard the 12 at-large senators before. Like that's new. That one jumped off the page to me. National popular vote for 12 at-large senators, 12 more votes in the Electoral College. They love the left loves some kind of national popular vote. They just got to have that somehow. I have heard, of course, of expanding the House, and to be totally honest, I don't know if that's the worst idea in the world. Right, expanding the House so that each House member is representing a smaller number of Americans as our population continues to grow. I think there's actually a decent debate that could be had about that. And the Supreme Court aspect here is completely wacky, too. To take away the power of the Supreme Court to rule in any case where the United States or a federal agency is a party. I don't know what that number is. Didn't have time to research. My guess is that's a fair number of cases that no longer will be in front of the Supreme Court. It's a dance around the court packing plan that many on the left have. And, the preamble here where he describes the problem is just plain dumb, right? Campaign finance reform, gun violence prevention, access to health care. He means abortion, just doesn't say it, right? Access to health care, this means abortion. Failed to deliver the people's will. If that is the case, the people have an opportunity every 2 years, every 4 years, and every 6 years to replace lawmakers who are not doing things that they want. And just 8 months ago, we had an election in which Republicans now have control of the White House, the House, and the Senate. If these were issues in which the people's will were not being delivered, they have every opportunity to make that change. The problem he describes is not a problem that does not have a solution already. He just doesn't like the fact that that's the solution to the problem. And thinks, allowing national popular vote for senators, changing the nature of the Senate, changing the number of Electoral College votes, all these things would benefit people he likes.
It's ridiculous. It's obvious the left has no respect for states. Obviously, at the founding, that was a major consideration in everything that they did in putting the Constitution together. And so the idea, and you hear this all the time from the left, how is it that California only has 2 senators and Wyoming also has 2 senators? The states have the equal power. If you want your based on population chamber, that's the House of Representatives. And I'll bet you, even though the Democrats wanted to push to 13 Supreme Court justices a couple of years ago, that if the Republicans decided to push to 13 justices right now, they probably wouldn't be for it. It's kind of like the filibuster. It all depends on the present circumstances. It's either a Jim Crow relic or it's saving democracy. It all depends on the majority.
I'm reading and thinking of it here about those 12 at-large senators, which he says would create 12 national votes in the Electoral College, and then thinking, how would those be assigned? And I guess you'd have another line on the ballot that because you'd vote for your own state electors, and then somewhere below you'd have to vote for a national. I'm not sure how this would work. I'm sure there's some sort of detailed plan somewhere, but it's not in the one sheet that we have, and seems to be extremely complicated.
Well, if you want a coherent understanding of the American founding and why our system was wisely put together the way it was, Hillsdale College, where Scot teaches, is the way to do that. And you're going to learn a whole lot more through their free online courses than just the American Constitution, although that is perhaps their flagship and signature online course, which I highly encourage you to take. But they're also focusing right now on American foreign policy. In this American foreign policy course, you'll learn how America should make decisions with a view towards securing equal and natural rights of American citizens, as well as analyzing and understanding the matters of war and peace that affect us all.
And your teacher for this course, by the way, is someone who has some firsthand, hands-on experience in the world of American foreign policy. It's Michael Anton, served in the first Trump administration, and then worked for us at Hillsdale College in our Hillsdale in D.C. campus, and now is back in the Trump administration. He's director of the policy planning staff at the State Department, and also very involved in some of these technical talks and negotiations with Iran that preceded the strikes this past weekend. If you want to learn and know about American foreign policy, you can, from Michael Anton, a guy who's actually done the job.
So go right now to hillsdale.edu/Martini to enroll in this course, American Foreign Policy. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/Martini to enroll for free. All right, Scott, for our third martini now, a little more cleanup from the New York City Democratic mayoral primary with Zohran Mamdani easily beating Andrew Cuomo. They haven't actually gone through the next rounds of the absurd ranked choice voting, but even Andrew Cuomo pretty early in the night said it's not going to happen. And one of the things that's been awkward, funny, cringy to watch in the last 24 hours is the Democrats who were trying to stay away from Mamdani because they knew what a radical he was. He's a communist, all these pie-in-the-sky promises that'll never happen without bankrupting the city. But now, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, both of New York, praising Mamdani following his primary victory, saying that Mamdani's socialist campaign, this is the wording over at Free Beacon, which includes proposals such as government-run grocery stores, resonated with voters. Quote, I think what's clear is that Mamdani's relentless focus on affordability had great appeal all across the city of New York, Jeffries said on Morning Joe when Joe Scarborough asked if Mamdani's win over Andrew Cuomo, quote, provides a roadmap for Democrats running in 2026 on how to energize the base. Schumer also praising Mamdani, saying that he ran an impressive campaign that connected with New Yorkers about affordability, fairness, and opportunity. But this is already talking about now kicking into the midterms and eventually into 2028. We've already got plenty of people jockeying for position. In your home state of Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker is announcing a run for a third term, one of the few states that still allows that, and he's made no secret he's pretty interested in running in 2028. So you got some folks saying that, no, this is kind of an outlier. We'll see what happens in New York City. It's not where the Democratic Party is. Others saying it's exactly where it is. If he is successful in the fall, which he probably will be, unfortunately, you're going to see a lot of Democratic hopefuls kind of parroting his approach to politics for the midterms. And if that's successful, you're probably going to hear a lot about that in the 2028 primary as well.
Looking at some of the results from this week, Noah Rothman writing at National Review, and you can just see the data too. You know, for all the talk about affordability, which you hear everyone citing as a reason that he won, he ended up losing the poorest voters in the city of New York. The people who would be most affected by his policies looked and said, no, thank you. He lost black voters in New York as well. And I think it's intriguing that that's not a bigger deal. Now, yes, he did win some of what you'd call, sort of middle-class voters. I think 63,000 to 117,000 income, which in New York City is, not a ton when you consider cost of living, of course. But the poorest citizens said no. And in other circumstances, a Republican wins the affluent votes and loses the poor and the black vote. You'd have stories written about how this guy who just won certainly doesn't reflect the real New York City, the heart of New York City. The people that make New York City looked and rejected him. And it was the rich and the affluent and the whites that really carried him over the finish line. And you're not getting any of that sort of analysis here with Mamdani. I think that you mentioned J.B. Pritzker, and he's running for a third term in Illinois. No term limits in Illinois, so he can run forever if he wishes. But he's likely to run for president in 2028, very likely to run for president in 2028. And Pritzker's a guy that has run farther to the left the longer he's been in office, and particularly since Donald Trump won his second term in office. He's been one of the most vocal critics of Donald Trump from the left. What happens in New York the next 2 years and how Brandon Johnson finishes his term in Chicago the next 2 years could be very interesting to see how it affects Pritzker in 28, because as of right now, he's a guy that's running not quite as far. He's not a communist. He's not a socialist like Mamdani is. But he is a guy that's been trying to embrace the far left portions of his party, as many Democrats have. If New York in the next 2 years, or he hasn't taken office yet, of course, but if it looks like things are off to a bad start in New York, assuming Mamdani wins the general election, and Chicago continues to have Brandon Johnson issues, is it a sign that those sorts of policies, that sort of governing simply doesn't work? And then what does J.B. Pritzker do? And he's going to win the third term. There's no doubt about that, barring some sort of ridiculously, acidine thing that happens in the race. He's going to win a third term. And it's unlikely that he'll face any big hurdles because he has complete Democrat control in Illinois, in the House and the Senate. Usually the governor's one of the people kind of putting the brakes on the far left wing of the party in Illinois. But this time he's embraced the far left wing of the party, and some of those proposals have made it through. So if things don't go well in New York, it might be a pretty big roadblock to Pritzker winning the nomination, perhaps. Or people would say, okay, we like it, but why do we need a literal billionaire, to carry the message, right? Is that the right sort of vessel for the message we want to tell voters? That's a big question. The other thing, very quickly, something we talked about some months ago, we have a Senate candidate here in Michigan, Abdul Al-Sayed, who ran, I think, in 2018. And Dave Weigel makes the point this morning, I think it was 2018, AOC wins in 2018, and sort of people looked to Michigan for Abdul Al-Sayed, who was running for governor at that point, if I'm not mistaken, and said, well, there's a guy just like her. Can he win? The answer was no. And now, very similarly, you've got Mamdani winning in New York City, and we look at Michigan and say, here's a guy running for Senate just like him. Can he win? I'm not sure about that. But certainly if they're looking for a guy in the same mold as Mamdani in terms of being young and telegenic, and look, he's a good speaker. And one of the lessons I think about Mamdani, too, is when you're for something, when you can clearly describe your policy positions, it helps. And you can even take a lesson from Trump on this, right? I mean, the first time he was elected, we're going to build a wall. It was very clear. And even if some of those policy prescriptions are not easily attained or might be impossible to carry out, people like hearing, I think, that concrete message and having those things they can really grab onto.
Yeah, I think what we might end up seeing here is a massive reverse skate by the Democrats, because if Mamdani wins later this year, the city's not necessarily going to collapse in time to impact the midterms that much, but we'll have almost 3 years in by the time 2028 comes around. So I can just imagine, with all the glowing, fawning media coverage, you'll have a bunch of Democrats trying to mimic him in 2026. So you get a bunch of even more radical people potentially coming into Congress and so forth. And then by 3 years in, you probably will have New York City disintegrating in a number of ways, and a bunch of Democrats will be sprinting the other direction, pretending they never supported that at all.
And I hesitate to try to draw too many lessons from this race, because it is New York City. New York City is not like the rest of America, as we've mentioned many, many, many times, for many, many, many reasons. And so you have this very particular place in an off-year mayoral election. Turnout wasn't incredibly high. For New York, it was, somewhat okay. Turnout wasn't incredibly high. You've got different issues in New York City than you do in the rest of the country. You had a bad opposing candidate. You have a system in which, the Republican pretty much does not exist. Sorry, Curtis Lewa, when it comes to the general election. So I hesitate to draw too many lessons from this New York City election, although it's fun to speculate.
Yeah, but I think the rallying around of Mamdani by the Democratic leadership now means that the party, for the most part, will do that. So while Adams potentially has a chance to get it closer than a lot of people might have thought a little while ago. Be very surprised if he actually is able to win that. But we'll see. We'll see how the campaign unfolds going forward. But Scot, it's always great to have you with us. Certainly had some good news and some absolute insanity to go over today as usual. So always fun to be with you.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it.
Scot Bertram is the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 on the campus of Hillsdale College, where he also directs the Hillsdale College Podcast Network and hosts a lot of them as well. He's also the host of Wasn't That Special? 50 Years of Saturday Night Live. I'm Greg Corombos. Thanks for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us all on X. Scot is at Scot Bertram, 1 T in Scot. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Thursday. Join us again Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.